Welcome to this new automotive news video for Tuesday, June 30th, 2026. On the agenda today, we're going to talk about BYD, which is starting sales in France, a type of vehicle that all European brands have abandoned. About Jeep, which will soon be selling Chinese cars in Europe. About Peugeot and Citroën, facing a new class action lawsuit. And about a historic first, since for the first time in the history of the European automotive market, a major French brand has been overtaken by a Chinese brand. It's happened. I hope today's topics will interest you. If that's the case, as usual, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for upcoming videos, boosting this one if the option appears for you, and of course, leaving a comment where you share your opinion on today's news. And just before we get into today's news, I wanted to ask you a question, because now, here we are. We're on the last video of June, and so the last video of the first half of 2026, I'd like, just like at the end of the first quarter of 2026, to do a little live stream where we talk about cars, discuss the news that stood out to you the most over the first 6 months of the year, the general market trends, and just talk about cars, plain and simple. I'd like to do it next week, so during the week of July 6, 2026, which is why I'm asking you in the comments to let me know if there's a weekday, not on the weekend, that works best for you to do this little live stream. That way, if more of you, for example, tell me that you prefer this live stream on Wednesday, well, I'll do it on Wednesday. It's up to you to let me know. European car manufacturers have pretty much all turned their backs on minivans. They all thought it was much more interesting to focus on SUV-type vehicles. And that's not cool. It didn't fall on deaf ears since BYD continues to try to take over markets that European brands have abandoned. BYD did it for the first time a few weeks ago with the launch of its first plug-in hybrid city car, the only one sold in Europe because no European automaker wanted to build this type of vehicle, and now it's taking on the minivan segment. BYD is launching the Denza D9 in France. Denza is one of the brands of the BYD group. Here, it's a large plug-in hybrid minivan, which is also almost unique in the European market. In a few months, this will be the only car left in the plug-in hybrid minivan segment, since BMW and Mercedes have already announced they are discontinuing their B-Class and 2 Series. Technologically, this car is very advanced. It offers a 58.5 kilowatt-hour battery. That's very large for a plug-in hybrid, and it technically allows it to go 210 kilometers in all-electric mode before starting the combustion engines. These batteries feature BYD's brand new technology called Blade 2.0, as well as flash charge technology. That means they can recharge at pretty incredible speeds, since we're talking about batteries that can be charged from almost 0 to 100 in less than 9 minutes. Even the best fully electric European cars can't reach such numbers. The electric part is paired with a combustion engine, a 1.5 turbo 4-cylinder engine. In total, the vehicle produces 350 horsepower. Here's a super hybrid technology where the combustion engine connects to the wheels and takes over when the batteries are empty, letting you drive with the engine. But the combustion engine can also be used as a range extender, meaning it can use the gasoline in the vehicle's tank not to directly power the wheels, but to generate electricity on board, recharge the batteries, and keep driving in full electric mode. Here we have a large minivan with 3 rows of seats and a very high level of equipment. In the second row, the middle seats are 2 separate seats like the front, not a bench, making them much more comfortable and customizable. Personal tablet, heated and ventilated seats even in the third row. Also, a small compartment that can heat up to 50 degrees, or cool down to minus 6 degrees if you want to keep or heat up food. Electronically controlled suspension, panoramic roof, a 16-speaker audio system from DVLet, and as an option in the ultimate trim, 0 gravity seats, each suspended independently from the others. To really have maximum comfort, 14 massage programs for the passengers, 2 individual 13-inch screens for the rear passengers, a head-up display, and a 10-inch screen for the front passenger. A highly equipped vehicle starting at 78,500 euros. That's a hefty sum, we can all agree on that, but the reality is that there's no European manufacturer offering a vehicle that could compare to the Denza D9 at that price. Only the Volkswagen multivan plug-in hybrid looks somewhat similar from afar, but for the same price, it has 100 less horsepower, which has half the electric-only range and, in its base version, generally offers a lot fewer comfort features than the Denza D9. Chinese manufacturers are investing where European ones have left, while European car groups are becoming increasingly Chinese. Stellantis's European brands are increasingly relying on Chinese manufacturers. There is already a partnership with Leapmotor, a new partnership is being discussed with BYD, and another one is being formed with Dongfeng. And now there's Jeep, whose future European models will be rebadged Chinese cars. This has just been confirmed and it's now official. Jeep will start selling a new SUV developed by the Chinese manufacturer Dongfeng, starting in 2028. It will be sold with a super hybrid powertrain, just like the BYD we talked about earlier, so it will be both a plug-in hybrid and a range extender at the same time in the same vehicle. What's craziest about this news is that this new model will be the top of the brand's European lineup. We're talking here about an SUV that will have the tough job of competing with the BMW X3, Mercedes GLC, and Audi Q5. Right after this news came out, the brand wanted to be as reassuring as possible, explaining that this new vehicle, even if it would be of Chinese origin, would still keep the Jeep DNA. Especially for off-road capabilities, we're discussing a vehicle that can handle rough terrain. Stellantis explained this situation and this strategic choice by saying that, because of fines related to CO2 emissions, Stellantis had to remove several of its best sellers from its European lineup, as they simply couldn't be sold anymore due to emitting too much CO2, which would have caused the total amount of fines Stellantis would have to pay to skyrocket, like, for example, the Grand Cherokee, the Gladiator, or even the Wrangler. As a result, Jeep is left with a very small lineup, and it wants to quickly come back with more models. And the best strategy for that, without high costs or excessive risks, well, it's simply to rebadge already existing vehicles. That way, Jeep doesn't have to pay to develop a vehicle itself. If it sells well, that's great. If it doesn't, oh well, it's not a big deal. Stopping sales will be easy and it won't have cost Stellantis much. And at the same time, it saves them from investing billions of euros in developing several vehicles that will only be sold in Europe. Since Jeep's biggest market is the United States, a country where the government outright bans the sale of cars equipped with Chinese technology, the brand knew from the start that these models would be reserved for Europeans, and they did everything they could to make selling them as cheap as possible. We'll also discuss a new class action lawsuit against Peugeot and Citroën. So that's not the only Stellantis news today. They're not the only ones. Volkswagen, Skoda, Dacia, and Ford are also involved. For once, is not related to a potential engine reliability issue, but rather to the danger posed by certain driver assistance systems. You know, those famous assistance systems that are supposed to help people avoid accidents? Well, sometimes they're actually responsible for particularly serious accidents themselves. Remember, we discussed phantom braking a few months ago. We started hearing about it in August 2025, after a news story involving the emergency braking assistance system, which is now mandatory on all cars, but doesn't always work very well. We have systems that sometimes see things that simply don't exist with the vehicle's cameras and sensors, and decide to slam on the brakes for no reason. There was indeed a case that got a lot of attention in August 2025, a Peugeot 208 that slammed on the brakes on the highway for no apparent reason because of this electronic system. A sudden braking with no obvious cause that led to a particularly serious pileup. It's probably the most well-known case, but there have been hundreds of cases of phantom braking that caused accidents, which were reported in France last year and this year. That's why several drivers who were victims of these electronic problems decided to come together and launch a class action lawsuit in civil court. They all report violent, unjustified braking in their vehicles, filing complaints against unknown persons since several brands are involved. In response to the increasing number of reports, the French government even launched an investigation as early as August 2025. The government has created a platform for drivers to report phantom braking incidents, but the Ministry of Transport has not yet shared any findings from the investigation. And meanwhile, a class action is being formed, with motorists who have been affected by these problems coming together, and their numbers are growing on social media. There are groups of several thousand people on certain forums who come together and share numerous accounts, simply stating that they have experienced the same situation. So, a first-class action lawsuit has been launched in France for this phantom braking issue. By the way, feel free to mention in the comments if you too have experienced this problem, on which model it happened, and in what situation. We'll see what comes of it. In the meantime, I have one last piece of news to share with you because it turns out that a major French brand has been overtaken in the European automotive market by a Chinese brand. This is the first time in automotive history this has happened. Indeed, we've been saying for months that Chinese manufacturers are going to enter the European market and shake everything up. What was considered just a threat yesterday is happening today. The numbers clearly show that the shift has already begun, since for the first time in May 2026, BYD sold more cars in Europe than Citroën. It was a close call. Citroën sold 31,600 units. BYD sold 32,300, so 700 more. BYD also surpassed Mini, Cupra, Fiat, Jeep, and Ford in the European market. A major leap forward that is no longer based solely on electric cars. Since as mentioned earlier in this video with the example of the BYD Dolphin or the Denza D9, BYD is actually focusing less on electric vehicles for Europe and more on plug-in hybrids. This is a situation that could happen again, or even get worse in the coming months because up until now, Chinese brands were still relatively penalized because of their origin. But now that Chinese brands are setting up their factories in Europe and will be able to produce their cars directly there, we know that some of them will be eligible for incentives, for example, or at least will be less penalized by taxes, and overall there won't be much left to hold them back. Meanwhile, European brands are falling further and further behind in terms of technology. And actually, that's the big question we need to ask ourselves with this topic. Did BYD overtake Citroën because BYD was extremely strong? It's true that BYD is focusing on categories of vehicles that other manufacturers no longer want to produce. Or is it that Citroën has performed particularly poorly, especially with a lineup and ambitions that have been significantly scaled back compared to what Citroën represented even just 15 years ago? Or maybe it's a bit of both. Let me know what you think in the comments. In the meantime, we've covered today's news. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, and of course by supporting through the join button below. See you again tomorrow for the first video of July 2026. Take care. Ciao.